Hey, Cowboy's back for another video on breaks. I have a few guides coming up after for some units, but today I'd like to discuss the break teams, how meta-defining Hat Blazer is, and how you can build teams for break. So even if you don't have Raw Mei, today I'll be discussing ways for you to have some fun with this awesome new mechanic. Like and smash the sub button if you want me to be in your Super Break team, and let's begin. Let's start with a recap on break and super break damage so we can find supports that can help us boost these values in order to create our break teams. Break and super break scale off of your level, break effect, enemy defense, resistance, and vulnerability modifiers. Break cannot crit, and so these two damage types do not scale off of crit. They also don't scale off attack percent, HP percent, damage percent, etc. Break and super break also scale off of two extra multipliers separate to each other. Break has a base or element multiplier, which is a multiplier that changes depending on the element you break with. It also scales on the max toughness of the enemy. The bigger their toughness bar, the bigger your normal breaks are. Super break, however, instead scales off of the toughness of your damage this time. So no matter how big the toughness of the enemy, you will always be doing your maximal base damage. It also scales on the Harmony MC's A2 passive, increasing your damage the fewer enemies there are on the field. And since a lot have been asking, no, skill level does not increase your break or super break damage. For example, Harmony MC increases their attack scaling on their skill, but it won't boost their break or super break damage. Those are defined by things that are not part of this skill's multipliers. They are set from the toughness reduction. If the skill, for example, instead had a scaling multiplier that increased break effect or toughness reduction every level, then leveling that up would increase your super breaks. So when we look for a support, we look for the following buffs or debuffs: speed and or advanced buffs, break effect buffs, weakness break efficiency, and enemy modifier debuffs or buffs, so def percent reduction or ignore, res percent reduction or pen, and vulnerability. And having supports with high toughness damage, which let us get to super breaks quicker, whilst also doing great super breaks themselves, is also a nice boon. Now, how do we choose a DPS? Well, first we'd want to match the element, unless our DPS can implant weakness, like Boothill can, or if we run Silver Wolf, though she can be very RNG. Then this DPS ideally has some of the following: self-speed buffs or advanced forwards, high toughness damage, ideally they don't have a high energy cost, multiple attack actions, for example Xueyi can ult or skill, but her talents can attack for more on top, self-buffs that increase break or toughness reduction. We also want normal or lower than average SP consumption. High SP consumption units like QQ would drain our Harmony MC's SP away, whereas low SP consumption units like E1 Sushang can enable us to run even crazier setups. Finally, if they have innate res pen or def ignore, then even better. Anything special like weakness implant on top is a nice bonus. So let's build our teams with all this in mind. The core break team for any DPS would be your DPS, Yuan Mei, Harmony MC, Gallagher, with Gallagher being replaced for low cycle clears with another support, or a sub DPS with high toughness damage. Gallagher is also replaceable when not into Fire Weak by sustain with great toughness damage. For example, I enjoyed Aventurine, though you lose out on his benefits and his high SP generation, which can be annoying considering how much SP Harmony MC may want to use. This team is the core break team for a reason, and running this with most DPS will let you run them full break and still clear endgame content, at least in my experience. It is truly astonishing to see such a free-to-play friendly strat come into Star Rel, and that's why people liken Super Break to Hyper Bloom. Ruan Mei is invaluable for that weakness break efficiency for the team and her break-oriented buffs, but 1.5 times the super break damage reminds me of Sparkle, who gives us 1.5 times the amount of turns when on a -1 speed setup. Bronya gives us 2 times the amount of turns but chugs a lot of SP. These two units would be comparable or could even be better over Ruan Mei when only considering a singular break DPS. Ruan Mei is insane because she can also boost support toughness damage and thus super break damage, which is especially important when considering Harmony MC. She also has her other benefits like the delays and break procs on top. Here are all the super break variant teams I could come up with, and they depend on your situation, for example the DPS you choose, as well as how the enemy situation is. Do not bring Luca, for example, into a 5-target fight. Now, we will go through every element and their DPS and see what criteria they pass or fail in. This isn't necessarily saying they're meta for break or shouldn't be built on their normal build, it's just me evaluating their pros and cons to running Hyper Break with said DPS, as the team is strong with nearly any DPS due to how strong the mechanics and buffs are in general. So first on to physical units. Argenti is great into pure fiction already, but that low energy cost tier 1 ultimate is especially nice to have. With a Himeko or Hata sub DPS on top, you can run a no sustain variant in pure fiction which slaps. I ran him on my standard crit build and he still did very nicely. 1 because he is just that good here, but 2 because of those big AoE super breaks. Boothill will be a single target powerhouse and likely the best break DPS in the game when he is out, whilst also still being able to brute force content thanks to his physical weakness implant. Lunay, Acheron, Jing Liu for example can brute force content that isn't weak to them, whereas break DPS cannot unless they have weakness implant or ignore in their kit. This means Boothill should not only excel into physical weak, but any element really with a low amount of enemies, since it is tied to his ultimate. Klarak do a lot of attacks when hit, but you are not being hit when the enemies are broken. Bit of an anti-synergy with this one. Luca was amazing for single target breaks before, and he still is for the initial break. With super break though he falls off a bit, considering Sushang and Boothill will just do his job better. Speaking of Sushang, her advances on her A6, self-break effect buff, speed buffs, and advance on ultimates as well as SP neutrality on her E1 make her a very formidable break DPS. Finally, Physical Trailblazer is a physical DPS, but for some reason I can't use him with Harmony MC on the same team. For Fire Week, we could actually run Asta as a break DPS in low target scenarios with her high toughness damage skill. Especially with Gallagher, 5 week toughness bars will be deleted. Her speed buffs on top are very useful here too, and she can run a perma ult setup at this point with Cogs, or Memories of the Past for even more break. I think she could actually be really good. Gwynafin could run break before into Fire Week, and she can still do so now. She also provides damage amping power for break and super breaks, which is cool too. However, I don't think she's going to be beating other options. One of those options being Himeko. She has multi-attack actions with her talent follow-up, which coincidentally comes from breaks. She could be a main DPS for breaks or a break sub DPS thanks to Harmony MC. She's already amazing for pure fiction, and now you can run 2 types of builds on her. Hook has a bunch of toughness damage and some advance forward. Other than that though, nothing too special. So she could be a 1 to 3 target break DPS, but I want to see Asta break DPS more now. As a Numbi I don't think should be built for it, but they could in single target technically. Fire MC has the same problem as Physical MC, which is a shame because they are quite cool as a breaker. For Ice Week, we could start with Jing Liu. She has advances and okay toughness damage. She also gives herself a ton of attack and crit rate, so you'll still be pumping out your kit damage easily. You might lack the advance from say a Bronyo, which can suck though, but the combined damage from Gallagher, Harmony MC as well as your Jing Liu's could be enough for a decent clear. She also uses little SP compared to standard DPS, which is great. Yanqing specializes in single target damage and he can get some extra toughness hits from his talent procs, though they are RNG. You also couldn't run Gallagher if you wanted these procs. Misha has a low energy cost with a stacking hit-based ultimate, which increases toughness with every hit accumulated. At E1 especially, with the additional 5 hits, we have the highest toughness damage in the game on a single target. He can pop out some insane super break numbers, has some death shred utility too, and on a break build he can finally use his signature light cone without it being garbage. The freeze utility can also be nice to further stall out for super breaks, and his E6 finally gives him SP returns. Hela also has a low energy cost and can get it back very quickly. On a Thief build for example in Ice Week Pure Fiction, you can keep spamming that 60 toughness damage ultimate and go crazy. The death reduction on top is perfecto. She would rather be suited for a subbreaker and damage amper role though, rather than main DPS. Herta is formidable as a main DPS or sub DPS in Pure Fiction, and that does not change with the introduction of Hatblazer. Now, instead of having to farm crit, you could opt for full breaks, or if you have her on a crit build, she can still pump out a lot of super breaks. She could be the focus into Ice Week or be brought into any element, provided you bring a main DPS that matches. For Lightning Week, our latest DPS is Acheron. However, she doesn't have any benefit to break damage and her toughness damage is just okay. Yuan has his Lightning Lord, which can amount to 150 toughness damage. His AoE skills and ultimates also provide a bunch. I ran him a couple times on break in 2023 and now it's actually not as meme as it used to be. He's also erudition, so he can abuse the passkey light cone for massive energy gains. Savol is an alternative as another erudition unit, and with her lower energy cost and E2, she can spam ults out the wazoo. She also has shock damage over time extension, so on that break build, her break shocks will actually do a ton of damage as well, whilst also proccing more often thanks to Ruomei's pseudo freeze delay. Kafka can abuse solitary healing for energy and break effect, and she has 2 attacks every turn of hers. She also doesn't have to opt into crit anyway, so you can use those pesky break effects rolls to your advantage now, and she can detonate her own dots and her break dots, as always, for a ton of burst damage. I used Kafka and Himeko in the Lightning Fire Week MOC, and it was a treat. I love how Harmony MC makes these different teams work. Arlen uses no SP and can thus run a Bronya Robin Harmony MC setup, for example, though you'd need to be as skilled as Neo from the Matrix if you don't break fast enough. Black Swan needs a lot of attack percent, wants speed, and effect hit rate, so she's not as easy to opt into break effect as Kafka is. She also lacks the same amount of high toughness damage. Since Kafka will be there anyway though, you can try a no-sustain Kafka Black Swan team with Ruomei Harmony MC, and her damage buffs will be very nice. For example, that E1 for Kafka's kit damage, break damage, and super break damage. Blade can get a lot of extra hits out thanks to his talents, though he also won't be hit if the enemies are broken and delayed a ton. Break Sampo was a thing before, and it still can be. His skill is a bounce and is thus useful for single target toughness focus. Other than that though, not much to him. Danheng is like Sushang in single target focus, but lacks the high speed buffs or advance forward, or really anything that makes Sushang so strong with super break. His E4 can technically give him another turn, but he has to kill with his ult rather than getting the advance for free. Zila attacks a boatload of times and has innate res pen, which technically can make her fine if you really want to meme with her. I prefer Silverwolf as a break DPS though, as she not only does great toughness damage, she also amps the heck out of any super breaks with that Death Shred and Res Shred. She is also a formidable 4th slot if running no sustain for any break team, as well as being a decent replacement to Ruomei in regular break teams. And just like Boothill, she could also implant her own weakness onto the enemy, albeit with some RNG. Xueyi has to be mentioned as she is one of our best break DPS. She said, screw your 90 toughness damage single target ults and hit us with 120. She said, screw your pure break build and hit us with hybrid. So she could do damage before breaking, during breaking, and after breaking. Break effect buffs scale both parts of her kit, and she attacks a ton thanks to her talent. Like weakness implant kind of works, she can ignore the element for toughness damage on her ult and talent post E2. E4 gives more break effect, E6 gives more talent procs. Xueyi could attack twice with her autarky, but she consumes too much SP for our break team. For Imaginary Week, Dr. Ratio can spam out strong single target hits, however with our normal break core you lack the debuffs for consistency, so it's not great. Maybe opting for Silverwolf instead of Gallagher makes him work, but that's a triple buffer comp, which is always going to be OP if you can manage it. Lune does some insane toughness damage, but it comes at the cost of high SP consumption, unfortunately. Welt has a 90 toughness damage skill, and he can perma delay enemies with Imprison and Breaks with this team. He could work as a super break DPS, but I would definitely run no sustain if so, opting for a Silverwolf, otherwise I think you would lack damage. So that's the beauty of Harmony MC and Super Break. Your DPS could abuse Super Break, and if they can't as much as others, Harmony MC can always do a ton of damage themselves. Ruomei ideally is there to benefit both, but you can always try other teams depending on your unit used or how you use them. Let me know if you tried any DPS with this Hyper Break team and how it went. I tried Kafka, Himeko, Jing Yuan, Serval, Lune, Ratio, Xueyi, Sushang, Argenti, Ata, and Misha, and it all went well. I'm very happy free-to-play players or low spenders have a new way of clearing content without fishing for those high crit relics and DPS. Thank you to everyone watching, thanks to my amazing YouTube members, and have a good day.